First of all, we need to remove the end spacers. Then, once we've got the spacers removed, remove the free hub by gripping it, pulling it off. Now do be careful, there is a washer in there that sometimes can stick to there, so we mustn't lose that. If when we reassemble it and we find that it all locks up, it may be because we haven't got that in position. And to remove the washer, you just gently pick it away. Now I appreciate this is a brand new hub we're working with, and it may be the case that there is some dirt in there which obviously we're going to clean out. But then we take the hub, rest it on your hub support tool, and then we just gently tap the axle through, which in turn will leave only one bearing left in your hub shell, and then we will have the seal, which will automatically have been knocked out on the axle with the bearing. To then we take that, your drift, and gently tap. Now it's good to move your drift across to the opposite side so you're knocking it even. Don't keep knocking on one side of the bearing, and just gently tap it out. That's it. And that will leave your hub totally empty. Now we're going to show you how to strip down the free hub. Firstly, if you can just bend the seal over and run your fingers round, and that flicks off. Now this is sided. As you can see, there's a step on the inside which when we come to refitting goes on in that direction, so it's the smooth step to the outside. And then we can remove all the pawls, and then we can remove all the springs. You just got to watch they don't stick to your fingers. And then clean all the excess off. And then get a screwdriver and clean in all the seats. Once we have the springs removed, we then take the drift, and you're making sure you're getting it on the outer edge of the bearing on the outside. Gently tap it and just rock your drift across to the other side, making sure you're still on the inside of that bearing and not on the inside of one of the others. And gently making sure it's nice and even once it's out. With that, the spacer will fall out, and that will leave us with two bearings on the inside and one spacer tube. Now this is a little bit more difficult because we've got a shorter spacer tube, so there's not as much angle. But if we can then try and tap that inwards, keeping pressure on your drift, and that's locked out. And then that spacer tube. Now make sure you recognise which spacer tube comes from where, because they are different sizes, but it's the shorter one that goes into the free hub first inside. And then when you're knocking the outer bearing out, this must come in an outside direction. You've almost to hold it in your hand. It won't be mega tight, but rotate your drift again, and knock it out in your hand. And trying to grip it at the same time. So that leaves us 3 bearings, 2 centre tubes, and your free hub. Now when refitting your bearings, once you've cleaned everything out, all nice and clean in there, you sit your new bearing inside. Now this is the actual Pro 3 rear bearing press tool, which has a step on the outside, which is what allows the bearing to press in properly. Now I appreciate you may not have these tools, but if you've something that will press on the outer edge of the bearing, then it won't damage the inside. Just make sure it's flat across and no curved edges where it might sit in the seal. So if you can sit that in position, then take the rest of the Pro 3 bearing press tool gently tap it. You may hear that there is a slight tone change when you're knocking it inside, and that's when you know it's home. So then we take the shorter spacer of the two spacers. Again, rest the bearing, and always try and feed them in with your fingers as much as you can. But then we just need the one tool. Again, it's the smaller diameter of the press tool that we're using, and gently tap it home. Once we've done that, just make sure you can spin everything and make sure it feels nice. Take your longer centre tube of the two and try and align it with your finger to get it central as possible. And then we take the bearing, try and just press it in to get a location on it. Then you can either use the longer tool or the opposite side of the shorter tool, and just gently tap that home. So once the bearings are in position, if you just put your finger in, just line it up. The spacer will be loose in there, and just try and get it as lined up as properly as much as possible, and then when we slide it onto the axle it makes it easier for fitting. Now we'll go to fitting the seal on. As I mentioned before, make sure the smoother edge to the outside and just work it so you can click that part in and keep following it round, and as you can see it'll just click in. One thing when you have cleaned it, make sure you've cleaned the groove out correctly, because sometimes when you spin it and you've left the grit in there, it can feel a bit naff. Then we'll take a little bit of grease, grease the pivots where the springs and the pawls will sit. And then with the springs, we'll sit the spring in and try and follow it round and feed it in. Don't try and force it, just sit it in, follow it round. Also making sure that it's the solid piece to the outside when you're clicking it like that. And then we'll sit the pawls in. And what I generally do is try and hold it like that with a screwdriver, push your spring in and push it down. So it's sit it in, push the spring and push down. So once all those four are in position, take a bit of grease just where the spring's touching the pole and sit a bit in there, and once the spring's rubbing on the pole it helps lubricate it to keep the spring working nicely. And then run your finger around, just check each one is returning nicely, and then we're ready to assemble that on the hub once we get it built up. To remove the bearing from the axle, we just rest it gently in the vise and remove it like that. Once we've cleaned all the hub shell up, make sure everything's nice and clean both sides. We'll apply a small smear of grease. Now this just helps the bearing slide in properly. Then we rest the bearing, making sure you press it in with your fingers as much as possible. We take the tool HTT182, rest it on the bearing. Now once you've just got it there, hold it in your fingers. Make sure you're tapping it in square, don't just go full on. And then you can see that it's just sat lower than what the actual hub shell is. If you're not using our proper press tools, be careful with sockets because they're rounded on the ends and they can damage the seal. You think you're pressing on the bearing, but it can be resting on the seal, and then that may catch on the actual race inside. Once we've pressed that in, we then fit the axle, the long shaft in first, and then we rest the hub support tool in there, press this on, then we take the rest of the pressing toolkit and we gently tap that and make sure it's spinning nicely. If in some reason it may feel tight, firstly check that your bearings are pressed in correctly, and also make sure you haven't twisted the bearing or been some dirt left where the bearing seats, which might make the bearings run at an angle to each other, which can make it tight. But that's spot on, is that? Now we have the bearings and axle in place, we're going to fit the seal. Now the seal has a flat edge and a tapered edge like that. So we're going to take a small amount methylated spirits. This is purely to help it slide in, but then once it's in position, the methylated spirits will dry and grip nicely in the shell. If we grease it and then afterwards grease in there and fit the spacer, we have a chance it hydraulics the seal back out. So we'll just leave that to dry and we'll carry on with the rest of the process at this side. Now the grease we use is a Mobile Hex HP 222, and what we do is just fill the ratchet teeth, nothing more. If you can get your finger in and just smear it round, possibly a little bit more in that. And all we're trying to do is put enough in to lubricate the teeth. If you try and jam pack it, it won't allow the ratchet and pawls to work properly, so they'll end up sticking and your drive will end up skipping. Once we've got that in position, we fit the washer, push that down, and then we've got the free hub. Now once you get it somewhere near, rotate it backwards and that'll help it clip in. And then we take the tool, the seal tool, which is HTT 175, press that on there. Just use your fingers to try and make sure the seal is central, and then click it into position. If for some reason it gets twisted, generally shows up because you can't spin it. Feels good, that. Now then, try and take a small amount of grease and just put it in there just as a little bit of extra protection, and then some in there. By now the methylated spirits will have dried. And then once we've cleaned our spacers, a little bit of grease on the outer edge, just smear it around, because sometimes the seal can dry out and you may think that the bearings feel tight, but it might just be simply that spacer on there and the seal that needs lubricating. Now when you push it on, be sure you don't ram it on, or else it may push the seal out. We're just double checking, yep, that's gone in spot on, and your seal should be level with the edge there, with the flat side on the inside and the taper of the seal sitting there. Then we'll take the drive side bearing, spacer, sorry, sit that in there, and that's your complete Pro 2 Evo hub rebuilt, ready to ride. It may be that you need to change your hub spacing. Maybe you need 10mm, 12mm or 142, maybe you've purchased a new bike, and all you simply need to do is remove your existing spacers, say it's 12mm, and fit the spacers there. Make sure you've greased them first just to help them slide in on the o-ring on the inside and the outside, but then you've no need to change the axle, and this is why the Pro 2 Evo is so much better, because we don't have to change the axle internally, just a simple spacer change.